That is the core of our message. There should be the openness to confront your locust. So overwhelming, overpowering, that the Egyptians can no longer stand it. A plague of locusts can wipe out all your hard work, all your investment, all your legacy, simply in a day or a week. And he will take care of it for you. If God is for us, who can ever be against us? Romans chapter 8 and verse 31. Officials. But he still refused. And that is why the destruction came upon him.
When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, what a glory He shares on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for the score of our way, to be happy in Jesus, and to trust and
Greetings. We are continuing our series on the book of Exodus. You know, as the Israelites settled at the foot of Mount Sinai, there were two things which were very necessary for them. That is, to worship God. And to worship God and to relate with God, first God gave them the 10 commandments. And the 10 commandments are the basis by which they relate to God and they relate to one another. After that, God also went forward to establish two things. One, altar, the altar with which they should worship him. And then the second was the tabernacle. The altar gives you how they should actually approach God and worship him. The items that they have to worship God on should be placed on certain things. And here, what the items for worship, which was animals or whatever rituals they are doing in terms of worshiping God, it has to be placed on a certain object. And the object with which things are placed for worship is called altars. And normally, when we talk about altars, we are talking about sacrifices that are made, devotions, commitments, and whatever services are done for God are done from altars. We know in the Old Testament, the first person to establish an altar was Noah. He established an altar for God. And we know Abraham established several altars for God as he goes from one place to the other, as he worships God and he moves from one place to the other. And the altars of Abraham became monuments by which we refer to various intensive relationships and dealings with God. In the same way, when we come to our world, altars are very important. They are the ones that invoke relationships. Altars are places where people really relate so closely, ritualistic with their God, and do things in terms of forms that relates to their God. And they are very potent. Altars in our lives are very important. We have so many altars in our lives in terms of the various points that we relate to somebody religiously. In our traditional homes and other places, there are family altars. There are altars that are related to clans. And various organizations have established altars. Some are secret altars that we don't know. But the altar that you establish is very potent in the way and the directions that your life would go. But when we look at the Christians, we realize that they also have to have a specific, definitive altar with which they worship their God. So there are altars that are godless. That is, they are not related to the God that the Christians want to worship. And when you worship any particular deity, there are altars which are unacceptable and there are altars that are acceptable. Today we want to look at, as the Israelites were there and they want to start worshiping God after they've got the 10 commandments, the godly altars and the godlike altars and the godless altars. We start from the godless altars that God prescribed that the Israelites should not succumb to. And we'll look at Exodus chapter 20 to give us those godless altars. So today we're going to talk about godless altars. We look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 22 and 23. And it says, "And the Lord said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel. You saw for yourselves that I spoke to you from heaven. Remember, you must not make any idols of silver or gold to rival me." So here, there are characteristics of godless altars. First, one of the characteristics of godless altars is that they are culturally conceived. They are not conceived from divine angles, but they are culturally conceived. Secondly, godless altars are secularly constructed. The construction of the altar itself is secularly related. Thirdly, the altars are competitive in operation. They compete with other things that the God of Israel has actually prescribed. And lastly, they are all inclusive in configuration. The way the altars are done, it means that you can have an altar for God and you can have an altar for other gods or other religions, and you should be okay. So these are the characteristics of godless altars. Let's look at first the altars that are constructed, which are culturally conceived. When you read Exodus chapter 20, verse 22, it says, "And the Lord said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel. You saw yourself that I spoke to you from heaven." I spoke to you from heaven. So the altar that God wants them to establish are altars that are coming from the God of heaven and not the God of the earth. So it means that the altar that they have to establish should be an altar that is related not to the cultural situation that they find themselves. It should not be just around the culture of the people around. It means that it is a scriptural altar which is prescribed by God himself from heaven, not a culturally conditioned altar that does not come from God's throne room in heaven. They are not earthly constructed altars. They should be heavenly constructed altars. In that case, he says, you saw for yourself that I spoke to you from heaven. I didn't speak from you from earth, talking about stones or trees. I didn't talk to you about rivers. I didn't talk about a constructed thing in terms of the cultural situation, the things they worship. So it means that it should not be a culturally conditioned thing, because sometimes it says, oh, our culture says we can worship mountains. The culture says we can worship trees, and the trees that we worship, God is in it. God is saying that he's not in the tree, he's not in the river around us on earth. He comes from heaven. So if you want to have an altar for God, the altar from God should be an altar that has a heavenly thinking. If your altar is earthly constructed, God doesn't live in your earthly constructed altars. The biggest tree is not the tree that God is in. The only river in your town is not where God is. God is in heaven. He is not actually somebody who lives in our trees and in our rivers and in our lakes and in our stones or big rocks that we see around us. So that's the first thing. Second, it should not be secularly constructed. If you construct an altar which is secularly constructed, it is godless. Exodus chapter 20:23 says, remember, you must not make an idol of silver or gold. In our secular and contemporary context, using precious items like silver to construct or to produce something is seen to be really an idol that you worship. You see, some people have this thing, thrones that they construct for their chiefs and their rulers. And these thrones that they construct are made of gold and they are made of silver. So there are some people who even believe that sometimes the table or the altar that has been constructed from God should be that which is constructed from gold and silver, very precious items, which will be glittering. And secularly, gold is the most precious. Silver is the next. But God is saying that this secular construction of a silver and gold to represent me is not what I expect. It becomes a god. People worship that throne. People worship that seat. People worship that table, which is constructed from gold and silver, the most what? Precious of all items. So be careful, because you can construct an altar for God in your mind. If it's secularly minded, made of silver and gold, designed in such a way that it will attract attention from God to that designing thing. The designer altars that you do, the most precious ones, the silver, the glittering ones, the custom made altars can attract people so much so that they forget about their God, and by the time you realize, they give reverence to that throne rather than God. Be careful about the kind of seats that you construct for your bishops, for your moderators, and for others. If you construct it in gold and silver in such a way that people start worshiping that instead of God, it's a problem for you. Even your podium from which you preach from should be such that it does not attract people to that podium because of its construction, its custom made, and the way it is made, that distracts from people's attention to the God whose altar should not be so secularly oriented and done. Now, even gold and silver altars are not necessarily divine. It is not that which makes the altar godly. Thirdly, competitive in outlook. Exodus chapter 20, verse 23 says, "You must not make any idols of silver or gold to rival me." God does not want to create a competitive altar space. He does not want the Israelites to make a competitive altar space so that the Israelites will have to choose between the altar of God and the altar of, say, Baal, or the altar that is made for some other gods or some other people. God's demand is simple. Don't try this competitive bid for loyalty. I don't want that type of competition. You don't need to pit God against your other pet altars. I don't want to compete in your life with the altar of your husband, the altar of your wife, the altar of your child, the altar of your business, the altar of your political party. I don't want to compete with such altars. There are people who have competitive altars in their lives. They have an altar for some secret societies that they belong to, and the altar for God. And these two altars are competing in their lives. At one time, they go to that shrine. They go to that altar that they think helps them to have successful business. And then when they want to worship God, they come to the God of the Israelites. God is a very jealous God. He does not share with other people in terms of worship and loyalty. So if you have a God under your bed and another God when you come to church, God is saying to you that don't deceive yourself. There is not a God for you when you are fighting other people in battle, who is a battle God for you, and then you have a God who is a God who helps you when you want to worship. The God that you worship should be one God. He should see you through all the thick and things of your life. Don't have a competitive God that, should I go here or there? No, you should go only one way. There shouldn't be two or three ways. The last is the inclusivity of the configuration. It says in verse 23 of Exodus 20 says, "Remember, you must not make an idol of silver or gold to rival me. God is interested in exclusive altar space and not worshiping him plus other deities. So you have other altars. If you have other altars, please, God is saying you should give up those other altars. When you go into some chiefs' homes, they have traditional family altars where they pour libation or prayers, and then they have morning devotions with their family, and so they have a Christian altar and a traditional indigenous altar for their family gods. Some have altars for traditional worship and altars for Sunday worship. It is unacceptable because adding other altars makes it godless in the eyes of Yahweh. May you be exclusive in your worship, and may you be committed to the Yahweh that you say you worship. May you not culture determine what altars you are. May you not allow your clan or your tribe or your traditional position to determine the kind of altar that you revere. Shouldn't be secular, which is just glittering gold. That gold does not make it godly. It can make it godless. It shouldn't be a competitive situation, and your God should be exclusively worshipped. And that is the altar. Have only one altar. And that one altar can be one that in your family, when you meet together, you worship the God of Israel, the God of who gave birth to his son Jesus, who came to save you. The blood of Jesus sets you free, and you have no other altar than Jesus who saves you. May God bless you as you configure your God through the family altar is just a Bible that you read and the prayers that you make. And your altar in your life that is singularly minded is God himself. May God bless you as you singularly worship him and him alone. God bless you.
You are blessed with this message. To get in touch with other messages of the servants of God, follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel.